Thomas, coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Chrysalo. And Chrysalo has a question about prayer. And his question is this: is it appropriate to pray for countries or people who are of a different religion than yourself? And he gives the example of invoking a deity of peace to be of help to a country that is involved in war, or praying for a god of healing to help doctors in a country that has had a natural disaster, such as what recently happened in Nepal. And he wants to know, again, is this appropriate if your religion is different from their religion? And of course, it is important to bear in mind that not everyone would make the same answer to this question. I must answer as a Correllian because that is the background I come from. Some people from other backgrounds, of course, would have different answers. But my answer is I consider it completely appropriate within a certain understanding, and my understanding is this: that prayer and magic are simply different ways of doing things, but they are no different than other ways that we might do something. So, let us look at a couple of practical examples. If you were driving along the side of the road and you saw someone who had had an accident, and they were lying on the ground and were in need of CPR or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, if you knew how to do these things, even though the person is unconscious, would you do it? And what I would say to this is that if your answer is yes, you would give them CPR or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, well then there's certainly nothing wrong with praying for them. It's not really anything different, it's just a different way of approaching it. And ideally, if you know how to do those things, you would do both of these things. You would do the physical intervention and you would pray. But if you think it's all right to intervene physically, then I don't see why you wouldn't intervene metaphysically. It's just a different way of approaching it. Now, let us say you were driving along the road and you happen to see another accident, and this person was unconscious and trapped in their car. And let us say that you just happened by merest coincidence to have the jaws of life in the back of your car. Would you get them out and use them to get the person out of their car before it blows up or some other horrible thing happens, or would you leave them there? And what I would say to this is if you would get the person out of their car, well then you certainly can pray for them. It's just another way of doing it. So, let us turn from that to the recent disaster in Nepal. Would you send money to support relief efforts in Nepal? If you would send money for it, I see no reason that you could not pray for it, even though you're of a different religion, because your money is coming from a different religion, and your energy would be no different. If you are assuming that they want your help in terms of finances, then they certainly also would want your help, I would think, energetically. So this would be my answer. Would you help by any other means? And if the answer is yes, then praying or even doing magic is not really inappropriate. If, on the other hand, you would not be willing to give someone CPR or to, in some way, help with a disaster relief effort, unless you were directly asked by the person in question, well, then you might not want to pray for that person. But if you are in doubt, there is a very easy way around the entire question. And if you watch my weekly prayer shrine, you'll notice that I normally do this, and that is that you direct the energy to them, but you ask them to use it or not in accordance with their own free will and their own highest good. You leave it to them what they will do with it, but you send it to them. And I think that that is, if you are in any kind of doubt at all, the best answer to the situation. Generally speaking, I think it's never wrong to try to help. And I also would go so far as to say that generally I think the higher self would reject it if it did not actually want it. So when it comes to praying for disaster victims in Nepal, or someone who has had an accident, or the person in the ambulance that just went by you, I don't think it's ever a bad thing unless you're trying to force something they might not want. So let us say, for example, it's a person in an ambulance. You don't know what's happened. What I would say is that you send them positive energy for whatever they may need. And that way you're not trying to force them one way or another. Because there are situations when it is not good to try to force healing on a person if they actually need something else. But their higher self is the only one who can truly judge how that energy should be used. If you send it to them, but the higher self is in charge of how it's used, there's certainly nothing wrong with that in my opinion. Now, going back to the question of whether it's appropriate to pray for peace for a war-torn country or for our war-torn world. I am the spiritual war for peace person, and I put my peace prayer on virtually every vlog I do, so obviously I think that's perfectly all right. Why is it all right, however? And my answer to that is that, you know, if you would work for peace in any other way, why not pray for it? If you would be willing to go out and campaign for peace, if you would vote for peace, if you just like to pass on happy little peace memes on Facebook, well, these are all ways that you can work for peace, some of them more effective than others. But if you're going to do that, why wouldn't you pray for it? There really is not, in my opinion, a difference. Now, there are people from other magical backgrounds who hold that magic's totally different from everything else in life. But that's totally different from my point of view. My point of view is that magic is perfectly natural. It's something we all do every moment that we're alive. And when we learn to use magic, or when we actively pursue prayer, we're merely doing consciously what we do unconsciously all the time. So, to me, again, the litmus test in a question such as this is whether it would be appropriate to affect the situation in any other way. If it would be appropriate to take a physical action, it's certainly appropriate to take a metaphysical action. And if it's not appropriate to take a physical action, then you probably should not take a metaphysical action. And I think it is inappropriate to have two different sets of morality for what are not really different parts of your life, because the separation of our spiritual life from our physical life is purely illusion. So those would be my thoughts on the matter. I hope you find them helpful, and until next time, may your blessed be.